Welcome to Beekeeping Today podcast presented by Bee Culture. Beekeeping Today podcast is your source for beekeeping news, information, and entertainment. I'm Jeff Ott.
I'm Kim Flottam.
And I'm Kirsten Trainer.
Today's sponsor is Global Patties. They're a family-operated business that manufactures protein supplement patties for honeybees. It's a good time to think about honeybee nutrition. Feeding your hives protein supplement patties will ensure that they produce strong and healthy colonies by increasing brood production and overall honey flow. Global offers a variety of standard patties as well as custom patties to meet your needs. No matter where you are, Global is ready to serve you. Visit them today at www.globalpatties.com.
You bet. We really appreciate our sponsor support. Without it, we would have a very difficult time bringing you this podcast on a weekly basis. When you go out and you visit with our sponsors, let them know that you're listening to Beekeeping Today podcast and that you heard their spot on our show. That will mean a lot to them and it'll mean a lot to us as well. With that, we want to thank Bee Culture Magazine for continuing their presenting sponsorship of this podcast. Bee Culture has been the magazine for American beekeeping since 1873. Subscribe to Bee Culture today. And while you're there, check out Bee Culture's Beekeeping Your First 3 Years, a quarterly magazine for beginning beekeepers. We also want to thank 2 Million Blossoms as sponsor of this episode. 2 Million Blossoms is a quarterly magazine dedicated to protecting all pollinator insects. Learn more on our Season 2, Episode 9 podcast editor and our guest co-host today, Kirsten Trainer, and from visiting www.2millionblossoms.com, and that is with a number 2. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We're really glad you're here. Hey, Kirsten.
Hey, Jeff. How are you?
Doing really good. So how are things in Berlin?
Well, I got spoiled because yesterday was an absolutely gorgeous day. The bees were flying. It's late October.
Nice.
They were bringing in at least 3 different pollen colors, which is always exciting to see.
Yeah.
And my experiment is up and running, and so I was trying to lure more bees out. So I set up a couple of feeders, but they were definitely protein hungry, and they ignored my sugar water.
Well, good. Well, things are progressing then, and hopefully they'll continue that way. Hey, I just received this morning, just locally here in Washington State, they found an Asian giant hornet nest. They were able to track a hornet back to the tree.
I heard that too, and unusual because they're usually ground nesting, but every once in a while they'll take up residency in a tree. I know they'd been trying to track one back, but the first time around they messed up with the glue and poor thing couldn't fly anymore, or awful thing, I guess.
Well, they're amazing creatures, that's for sure. And so there's a press conference this afternoon. I'll be attending that. It'll be interesting. Hopefully they have some video of it all. And they have the new trackers too, so they're a little bit lighter and a little bit longer range. So looking forward to hearing how that worked out.
Very interesting. I really wish they'd stop calling them murder hornets. I'm very annoyed with the moniker they've earned themselves. It's very misleading. Yeah,
I do too. I purposely avoid using that term.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. I agree with you 100%. It will be interesting to attend the press conference this afternoon. They plan on eliminating the nest this weekend. It's been rotten weather here in the last couple of days, and tomorrow's supposed to be a little bit better, they say. Anyways, so we'll continue following that here on Beekeeping Today podcast. So you have a guest for us this week. Who is it, and how did you find him?
Yes, I had a chance to speak with a commercial beekeeper who started out as an organic beekeeper here in Germany, then hopped over to New Zealand because he wanted to get his full year of beekeeping in. He sort of fell into beekeeping, and he's now actually importing Manuka honey from New Zealand. And I was introduced to him through an organic beekeeper who has supplied me with beeswax for an experiment. That's Stefan, and I'm actually joining him for dinner tomorrow night because he just got back from Georgia, the country, and so we're having a Georgian feast.
Well, very good. Wait, I'm looking forward to hearing it, and before we do, let's listen to our friends at Strong Microbials, and then we'll go right into the interview.
Hello, beekeepers. Your honeybees face a lot of challenges out there. Unbalanced food sources from monoculture crops, holding yards, drought, food shortages, antibiotics, pesticides, and pathogens like chalk brood. To overcome these challenges, your bees need the multiple bacteria that are in all nectars, pollens, and the environment. These bacteria aid honeybees' digestion and improve your honeybees' response and resilience to pesticides. Now you can help improve your honey colony health with a quick, easy, and safe-to-use product. Strong Microbial's Super DFM Honeybee uses naturally occurring bacteria to restore the healthy gut biome of your honeybees. Check them out today at www.strongmicrobials.com.
Welcome to the Beekeeping Today podcast. I'm guest host Kirsten Trainer. Today I have a chance to speak with Matthew Pettersson, who worked as an organic commercial beekeeper in Germany and then headed off to explore beekeeping in New Zealand. He is now a honey importer and packer, specializing in Manuka honey for the EU market. Matthew, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
So, Matthew, can you tell us a bit about your background? How did you get into bees?
Oh, that's always a very interesting question, I find. And one of my friends used to say that beekeeping attracts all the crazies, and that definitely that fits the bill.
You have to be a little nutty to work with stinging insects.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the remotest professions out there. I mean, who would come up with that? I mean, you know, I remember in school people used to say, "Oh, I want to be a policeman. I want to be a firefighter. I want to be these kind of things." No one's ever said, "I want to be a beekeeper." You know, so it's a totally awkward profession to me still today, but I really love it. So it was about 8 years ago. I was at a time I was in between professions. I had just quit my day job, working at a shipping company. And I was about 28 at that time, or even 27. And I felt like, okay, I want to take things a different route. Now I fulfill all the expectations that, parents put on you, family puts on you. Oh, you should be sensible. You should make money. You should do these and that things, right? So, and I felt like, okay, there was, but the question always was, what is it that's for me? Like, okay, that's for everyone else, but what is it that's for me? And that's a very difficult question to ask. And so I was just out there and traveling, and I was being really open to what I wanted. And I was doing yoga, and I was thinking I should study psychology and teach, or heal people, things like that, something to that extent. And then I had just gotten back from Thailand. I was in Thailand for 3 months, practicing Thai massage. And so I was living in New York at that time, and I'd just gotten back to New York after my 3-month stay in Thailand. So I went to visit my friend Sean, and he lived in the East Village. And I entered the apartment to my friend's house, and he had this huge pot of honey sitting there on a kitchen counter. And instantly, like right in that moment, I think I had 5 or 6 questions that popped up right at the same time. And it was like this dazzling experience where I had never seen anything like that before. And I began to wonder, is that honey? Could that be honey? How come there's so much of it? Where did you get this from? Like, is this really honey? And where in all of New York could you get so much honey from? You must imagine it was this really sizable, big pot of honey. So that was something really fascinating. And my friend, he started laughing, noticing that I was completely, overwhelmed with that sight. And it was also really beautiful because the light, shone through his kitchen counter.
Yeah. When light comes through, it's so beautiful and golden.
Oh yeah, it was this amber color. And that it felt like that light, that amber light, just flooded his table. And he said, Matthew, my father started beekeeping 4 years ago, and now every year he sends me this giant pot of honey to my home address. And that just resonated with me so deeply. Like it just sounded so right. I felt like that was the most precious gift that you could pass on to anyone, really. Like to just come up with a 50-pound kind of jar sort of honey. Like, here you go. It's for you. Can you imagine to receive such a beautiful, precious gift, like so much honey? I felt was the most beautiful gift you could give to anyone, especially to your children, and so that just I knew at that point in time, I knew that I wanted to find out about beekeeping, and
did you end up delving into beekeeping in New York, or were you then off to other
parts of the
world?
What had happened in the meantime was that on my transit from Thailand, I stopped in Germany, and I got accepted at university for studying psychology, and that came and that went so quickly, and so I realized, or I noticed, okay, I was going to move to Germany, so I really just flew back to New York to pack up my things and to move to Berlin, and so that was the one thing, one last thing that New York had to give me, basically, so for me to be ready to go and leave for Berlin. So yeah, that was quite a landmark in time for me to that started it off, and so I got back. It was October. I moved to Berlin in October, and then I knew that I needed to find a beekeeping course, and so I did. I found a beekeeping course for the springtime. So that's pretty much how it all started. Yeah. And it was from there on, it was just like, oh, just go, I just go. It was just, yeah.
So you end up taking a beekeeping class, and then eventually you're working for commercial organic beekeeper.
Exactly. So that happened right after. So I took this course, and I didn't even manage to finish the course, because then we have in Germany this term called Imkerpate, which basically means someone who is like your godfather, but for beekeeping, so like your mentor, so this is an old term, someone who shows you the ropes with bees. And so I had him, and he said, hey, you don't need to take that course. I'll teach you everything for free, and you can help me out, and you can work here with me. You don't have to do a course anymore. I'll make you a perfect beekeeper after 2 years or so. And I was like, okay, cool, I'll do that. So I didn't even manage to finish the entire season with him, because then I received an email from a friend of mine who'd found out about my journey and said, hey, there's this outfit there, this beekeeping outfit. They're looking for helpers, really, So this is and I said, yeah, it's me here. I'm helping here, You don't even have to pay me. I'll help for free, So and so that was this organic beekeeping company outside of Berlin, and so that took me to commercial beekeeping.
Okay.
Yeah, and
can you sort of outline what organic beekeeping looks like in Germany? We don't have organic standards in the United States for beekeeping.
Right.
So what?
Yeah. So organic standards they vary quite a lot. I mean, there's no one standard for organic beekeeping in the world, I don't think, at all. I mean, there's a standard in Europe, and the standard in Europe is, for example, that the reality of Germany, for example, is that Germany is about, I think, well beyond 90% of all of Germany is managed to some degree, which means there's no wild habitat for bees, essentially, right? So either it's urban areas or fields like that. So if you say organic in Germany, you'll have to narrow it down to what do you mean by that, and then since there's no wild, vegetation out there, or there's no way you could guarantee that bees wouldn't fly to manage crops within a radius of 2 miles or so. Organic basically means, or basically means that the way you manage the hive is organic. So you don't have to assure that whatever your neighbor doesn't spray or anything like that. People, they put it in there, but it's never like, oh, it's never like a mandatory thing. It's more like a suggestion.
I mean, it would be very odd if you could get your bees to go where you want. So.
Yeah, no, it would be very odd. That's true. But other countries are a little bit more stringent, because they have the luxury, because they have the countryside like that. They have unmanaged crops. They have unmanaged wildlife. So if you set up beehives over there, then it will certainly be organic, because there's nothing there. So that I found out to be the case, for example, in New Zealand in a lot of cases. But we don't have organic like that in Germany. So our organic basically means that you treat with formic acids, you treat with all the organic acids. You don't treat with strips, for example. So there's no chemical strips that you put in there.
No plastic foundation.
Oh, plastic foundation. There's hardly any. I don't think I've ever seen any plastic foundation. So people are still old school here. They still use, the wooden frames and wax foundations. And obviously, the foundation has to be organic. The sugar has to be organic. So everything that you put inside the hive has to be organic. But that is.
But you are allowed to supplement. You are allowed to feed sugar, organic
absolutely.
sugar?
Absolutely. Because again, if you wanted to maintain, there's hardly any room for bees to survive on a single crop here in Germany. I mean, the crops are not strong enough for that period in time. Otherwise, you wouldn't have any honey. So if you didn't supplement, really, that's so people try to always, try to manage what it's given. So, but obviously that doesn't work in New Zealand, that organic standard, and I don't know what it's like in the States. But
we just there's different like certified naturally grown programs, but there's no organic standard for producing honey in the United States. There is for selling honey, but not for making it.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. All our true organic honey tends to come from Brazil, and that's sold in the United States.
All right. Okay. So you can sell it organically, but you can't produce it organically. Is that true? What's that?
There's no national standard yet in the United States for organic honey production in the U.S. Because of where the bees are flying.
Right. Yeah. The same problem. It's the same problem. Whereas I believe that the States could have areas where you could produce organically.
Maybe if you went deep into the forest,
deep into Colorado. Yeah.
So
I see.
It's hard to get that much acreage that's organically managed.
And I could imagine it would be very political too. It's a very political thing too. Yeah.
And so when you say commercial beekeepers in Germany, what kind of scale are we talking about? Because for American beekeepers, commercial starts at about 1,500 hives.
Yeah. Not commercial. Commercial. So in fact, the apiary I work with, that was the largest apiary in Germany at that time. It still is.
Okay.
So at that time, I think they had about 46,000 hives. And that is that is really big by German standards. I mean, by far. I think that's I think that's like almost double the size of number 2. So so
I didn't realize there was anybody that big in Germany, to tell you the truth.
Yeah. I mean, that is and it's and organic, that's the funny part. So it's so quite big outfit to me at least, and I only later found out that there was even bigger than that. I thought that was, oh my god, that's massive, but when you go to New Zealand, that's again, I don't know the story, but so 4,000 hives, and obviously that that was a good playground to learn about bees.
You get a lot of repetition when you're opening up that many colonies.
So much repetition, and you have to develop a different kind of speed. And some would say, "Hey, that's not real beekeeping. Where's the time? Where's the love?" And that's obviously all these things are true. But that was, in a way, it really set me up for learning quickly, finding queens really quickly. For example, in a hive, right?
Oh yeah.
So you just go through them, you find them. It's just a thing. You start seeing them at night in your dreams. Like you'll spot queens. You start spotting queens there. So that was good. That was good training for sure. It was definitely really good training.
Well, and it gives you an idea also of what a healthy colony looks like, and you start recognizing problems very quickly because you have to. Such a good slate in your head of what a good colony looks like.
Yeah, you have to, and yet again, that's one way of managing. So you'll find that every apiary has their own set of things they look for in a way, and what they perceive to be healthy is what other people think is almost close to being dead. So there's quite a few different standards for sure, but so that was just 1.5 hours outside of Berlin. So and that's where met quite a few beekeepers. It was bigger teams, a lot of different people, and the people that I call friends today. So so that was good.
And then from Germany, you ended up in New Zealand to escape the Berlin winters.
Yeah. So again, that same year, we're still talking that same year where I took the course and then found my imkerpate, and then I went to work as a helper for no money or little. And then in that same year, I was like, okay, this is really happening here. I'm really feeling it, you know? I was so enthusiastic still, and couldn't get enough. And I realized, hey, you know what? I don't want to take a break. I don't want to take a break right now. I want to continue beekeeping. And the only way to do it was to travel to the Southern Hemisphere, obviously at that time. So there's a few countries, and only a few countries you could really pick for the Southern Hemisphere. And I decided, okay, I would love to go to Australia, but I think Australia would be too hot for me. And then I decided I'll just go to New Zealand.
Okay. And so how did that differ from beekeeping in Germany?
I mean, so it's funny because I thought I was working at an organic apiary. So I was thinking that everything was better, you know, at being organic, everything is better. And then I go to New Zealand and there's hardly any organic beekeepers, right? Hardly any.
Right.
And then I went to see their hives. And their hives were just pumping, you know. They were the fattest hives I've ever seen, you know, like double story and sometimes triple, and just density of bees that I've never seen before, you know. And the idea was only a lot of bees make a lot of honey. Duh, right? And I had just come from this ideology that, okay, that's not necessarily true, right? Because if you have fewer bees, then they're forced to collect more nectar because, you know, they'll disregard all other things. They'll have to make sure they have enough for the winter. So they collect more, they forage more. And there I was in New Zealand. It was just simple truths like, hey, you know, if you want to make a lot of honey, you got to have a lot of bees.
You gotta have a lot of bees in the box.
You gotta have a lot of bees in the box, and of course they have to be able to, you know, forage their pollen. They have to be able to. They have to have a lot of brood, and you have to have a good laying queen, and genetics are so important, and all of these things, right? And so that was different, also because in New Zealand, where I was on the top of the South Island, where I was. Okay. People didn't need to travel as much, so they didn't need to shift their hives as much. Here in Germany, you know, you take them from one crop to the next. You have to if you want to be able to make your 40-50 kgs of honey a year. But over there, you just let them sit on one side, and they'll make that easily. You know, so they weren't forced to shift their hives unless you, of course, were targeting Manuka. Then you were, of course, you had to shift them. But other than that, you wouldn't have to. And so I felt like everything was a bit more. It was a bit gentler. You know, the bees had more peace time. They weren't shifted around. They had plenty to forage on, and so it was more like lifting heavy boxes. You know, that was the work. So really having to crack open these full depth boxes and throwing them onto the truck. So, onto the truck. Yeah, onto the ute, as they would say. So, so that was a good workout. Let me put it that way. It was a good workout, but also it was also wonderful to see, you know, what a hive can also look like. Like, because I was used to single boxes, small hives, you know.
Okay. Yeah, no, these are the New Zealand beekeepers tend to tower them up. But I'm surprised there weren't any when I was in New Zealand in 2010, and that was shortly after Varroa made it to the South Island. Right. And so there were organic beekeepers still sort of holding on and trying to rethink their operations, but it sounds like most of them have now gone to traditional Varroa management if they're keeping any hive numbers.
Yeah, because the experience is not as good, and they found that these strips were easy to work with, and it's very true. I've seen that. I've seen that treatment in operation, and it's really simple. I mean, you can't do anything wrong. I mean, you could send anyone out there and you just tell them put 2 strips in there, So, and there's nothing to gauge here, right? So it's very simple, and it's very effective too. So it worked. It just works. And now that is also changing now. That's also slowly changing. The Varroa is growing more and more resistant to these strips. But definitely also when I was there in 14, 15, 16, it was still working then. So
okay.
So yeah. So I could easily see why you wouldn't want to switch over to any other sort of treatment. Yeah. I mean, formic acid is a little bit more complicated than that, and so
more labor intense, and
and you have to watch the weather. You have to manage the mite counts, all these sort of things. Like you have to add more acid now. You have to do a second run. All these kind of things you don't really have to do with strips. So. I could see that. So obviously, why make life difficult, right? So that's
and I mean, New Zealand is really famous, of course, for its Manuka honey. And how has that shifted beekeeping in such a relatively small country?
It's interesting because the second season that I was there, we had a beekeeper out from the North Island coming down to help us, and he said, "Oh, you guys are 20 years behind, like in terms of dynamics, right?" What he was trying to say was that, up in the North Island, things had gotten so competitive, like competitive for territory, competitive for, the prices of the hives have gone up. Bees were difficult, or, you had to book them in advance, and they were expensive if you wanted to buy nukes, if you wanted to, anything that had to do with bees or hives was just expensive. So it's a high buy-in to be playing this game of chasing Manuka honey in New Zealand. So, and that was still different in the South Island. So in the South Island, things were still a little bit more relaxed. So there were still sites available and way more land and not as expensive and all these kind of things. And he said, and he was like, "Oh, you guys, this is so easy going. This is cruising down here in the South Island." And up in the north, it was way different. So I only later really truly understood what he meant by that, because then the more you get to do, or the more you start to deal with this honey, the more you start to learn about, what are the worries, what do beekeepers worry about, So, and it's so I just want to say the dynamic is that everything has definitely gotten way more expensive. So, a hive, I mean, just a single hive costs about $600 New Zealand dollars, 600 to 700 New Zealand dollars, a commercial bee hive. So that is unheard of, in our part of the world. But over there, that's what people are paying. So, and they don't even always get good quality hives for that price. So, or you get kicked off the sites, So if you don't pay up to landowners, then you get kicked off the sites, and it's not a very romantic thing.
Well, and I'm sure because of the value, there's probably people coming and offering landowners more. If will you let me in instead? I'll pay you, I'll pay you 1.5 times what you're getting. And so
absolutely.
And I would imagine that the bee density has gone up, so the yield per colony is probably down.
Absolutely, exactly. You name it. All of these challenges, right? So just because you put up more hives doesn't mean you make more honey. That is also something that a lot of people had to learn. And also every year is different. The flowering is not on every year, so you pay landowners, and you don't know if you're getting that income back. So. And also, a lot of empty promises, because some people, they do feel like, oh, this is the year and we have to secure the site. We've got all these hives. We got to put them on there. And they just promise landowners empty promises, essentially saying, hey, we're paying you the X amount. And at the end of the season, they're bankrupt,
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
yeah.
Okay.
So there's
Yeah.
a lot of gamble that comes with it too. So and obviously landowners have also grown more precautious, and they have started to see, okay, maybe
Demand payment up front.
payment up front, exactly, and also only work with people that you know that are able to pay and all this. So it's really it's like a real estate business almost, right? Like people are buying land. So can you imagine? One of the beautiful things about beekeeping is that you don't need any land for that, right? What agricultural business is there where you don't need land? But as a beekeeper, you don't need land, but in New Zealand you do. So in New Zealand, otherwise you pay up, otherwise you pay the rent, which is quite a big,
getting steep.
Yeah, quite steep. So it's so that's why it's not for everyone, even though a lot of people have thought that way. Hey, I can keep hives and the average experience in New Zealand is about 2 to 3 years, obviously a lot of people trying to become beekeepers and make Manuka honey and sell it for, but all of these ideas, they are gone now. I think a lot of people, I mean, if you only have one bad season, right, and you have a high buy-in, you're having to pay all of these people
I mean, I'm sure the winners in the game are the people who've been there for years, right? And they have established relationships. They know how to run their colonies.
Yeah.
And so their buy-in was much smaller.
Absolutely.
And for anybody trying, it's a little bit like the gold rush. Anybody trying late to come into the game, there needs to be a lot of luck involved then to make it work.
It's definitely like a gold rush. And some people have also burned themselves. And also even established beekeepers have started to, worry because, stockpiles were also building up over the years, and people are holding on to the honey, not wanting to sell for any less than, amount X and
top dollar.
And anything. Exactly. So there's also a lot of pride that comes with it. Right. But who's able to hold on to honey for that long, right? And not go bust, right?
Better Bee is pleased to present the interviews by Kirsten Trainer. As a supplier to our nation's beekeepers for over 40 years, Better Bee provides the tools, equipment, and information you need to succeed. Through its many beekeeping employees, Better Bee serves you with solutions to your beekeeping challenges. That's why they can say with confidence that they are your partners in better beekeeping. Thanks to Better Bee for their informative catalog, website, supportive beekeeper education, and for sponsoring the series featuring Kirsten. Be sure to see the latest at betterbee.com.
And so you're now on the other side where you're trying to get beekeepers to part with some of their precious honey. How did you switch from keeping bees into importing honey?
So as I mentioned, there was this curve basically that was just building. So when I went to New Zealand, I had such a good time there working, and so I went back to Germany and I continued beekeeping there. So what I essentially did was 5 seasons back to back between Germany and New Zealand.
Okay.
So
you must have been a little tired after 5 seasons.
Yeah, I was definitely, but I was also a little buffer, So, and I somehow. But what I also found was interesting that my stamina started building up even better. So with everything that I learned, I started to learn how to move, how to be more efficient in my ways, and how to handle things. And that's what I found to be really, really important, like to just know how to move around the hive, right? So and well,
you can't buck honey boxes all day long.
No, you can't.
And not develop a good way of doing it.
If you lift a box more than twice, then you're you're going to get tired at some point. So exactly. So 5 seasons back to back, and then after the second time that I was in New Zealand, my friend at that time, and also still is my friend Phil, he also ran some of his own hives. So we were working for this apiary. It was him and me and some other people, and we were working shoulder to shoulder every day. And obviously, if you don't hate each other, then you will start to like each other. So so we got along really well. We also had obviously a few hiccups here and there, because when a season gets stressful, it gets stressful. So, then of course you get into little fights, things like that. But it was nothing major, and so we started to bond, and we became good friends. And at the end of the second season, he said to me, "You know what? I do have some excess drums of honey." Of Manuka honey. There should be Manuka honey, and would you like to take them back to Germany with you? Right? And I was like, I was positively surprised. I was like, oh yeah, Phil. Well, yes, I would like to, but I'm not sure I have the money available right here, right now, to pay for it. And he said, don't worry about it. I'll just pitch you that honey, and you just pay me whenever you sold it. Right.
Wow, that's generous.
That's very generous. And I felt really honored at the same time. I was very happy because to me that meant really a whole lot. For someone to trust and put that amount of trust in my hands, I felt like, oh, this is something really extraordinary. And so I think I have to say that I come from a shipping background. So shipping things around in the world it's not a problem from my point of view, but I felt like maybe it's for him, maybe it's exporting is a big challenge, and I felt really comfortable exporting that honey or importing it into Germany. So we set up a little company, a trading company, and we got an export license just for these 4 drums and everything. I called up my friend. And I said, hey, I have 4 drums to go on a pallet on the way to Hamburg. And he said, no problem, we'll do that for you, right? So everything, which is pretty much smooth sailing from there on. And I remember I was already back in Germany, and the drums of honey were still in the container on the way to Hamburg. And I was so busy with the bees again, being in the new season, and in the back of my head, I had these 4 drums that were kind of like sitting in my neck. I was like, okay, how am I going to sell this honey? Am I going to have to sell it? How am I going to do it? Right? I have never done anything like this before. So what am I going to do? So I basically just, I put them online. I said, okay, I have these 4 drums of Manuka honey from New Zealand, 1,200 kilos, arriving Hamburg around July or June. And, if you're interested, please contact me. Something like that, to that extent, right? So really, like you would sell your furniture, so really, no idea whatsoever, right? I didn't even know what amount of money I could expect for
money
it,
to
what charge,
charge.
and sure enough, I got a few people emailing me and saying, hey, you're Monica, honey. Could you send us a sample? And do you have analysis? And da. So basically, I managed to sell the honey 2 weeks before it even arrived. All of it.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So.
And they probably asked, well, when's the next shipment coming?
Yeah. So there was this other conversation that I had, and this person was saying, so next time, if you could get me a full container, that would be good. And all of these things. Right? So I sold that honey, and that was a good experience, But anyway, so that's pretty much how I got into it, and then essentially I talked to my friend who was transporting it then, and now is my business partner. I told him, he saw that I sold the honey, and he said, hey, this could be a business, that, right? And I said, yeah, I guess it could be a business. And he said, well, now you did a pallet first. Next time you're going to do a full container. That was his scope. That was his vision. And I didn't have that vision at that time. To me, it was something that I was never that sort of person to look 10 years ahead of things or something. I was just going with the flow. I think some beekeepers can relate and, just go with the flow. And so he had that vision, and I was like, okay, fair enough. Container. So I took my calculator and tried to type in what that what that could mean. What are we talking about here? And I realized that okay, I'll have to talk to some people about this idea, and so I pretty much just drafted a business plan for it.
Okay.
So I sat down and I wrote down, okay, this is the idea. This is what we can buy it for. This is what we can sell it for. This is what the margin is. This is the potential in the market, right? So I don't know where I pulled that information from, but I somehow figured that would be potential, right? And then so I wrote it down, and I knew I couldn't just walk up to a bank and say, hey guys, will you give me X amount for honey from New Zealand? And they were like, who are you, right? So this is not something you can go to a bank with. So I realized that I would have to talk to private people.
Right.
So, and that's what I did. Yeah.
Yeah. Getting that initial funding is always the hardest.
Yeah. But somehow, one way or another, it was not as difficult as I thought it was going to be. Because who dares to ask for such amounts of money, of anyone? Like, quite honestly, would you ever think, hey, why won't you give me money in the value of a house, right? So I can buy some honey.
Right.
I mean, who's going to do that? No one. But because you cannot imagine it doesn't mean that can't be true. It doesn't mean that is not a valid point. And I later started to learn that that's actually how it's done. If you have a business idea, of course, who's going to have all that money? Unless you're established. If you're a starter, then you need money, and you're only going to get it from people who are business savvy and believe or see it.
Right, and see your numbers and the value you can produce from it.
Yeah,
So.
and knowing also, I guess having no business, because I came from a background of having no business, right? So I was an employee, and I know that there are other people who, if they have one business or even maybe two or even three businesses, for them it's day to day, and they look at things differently. So when they see, oh, this could be another business opportunity, how much money do you need? Okay, well, that could be worth a try, But that's again, that's not the culture that I come from. I was really more into, I just wanted to follow my passion. That was where I was coming from,
Sure.
And
how is it running a business that's somewhat melded with your passion? Are you I mean, there's tedious parts to running a business. So Are you still excited about bees and honey?
I am still excited about bees and honey. I am, this is so funny because I had, I really liked beekeeping, but I was never, I don't think I ever expected it to pay for my bills necessarily. So I was getting by, but I could also see the difficulty in it, trying to make a living off of it, So I don't think I expected it. I think I just always wanted to give it a try and have an experience and keep bees myself and things like that. And now I'm back in the office, essentially. Back.
You're back to logistics.
Back to where I came from, and it's funny because a lot of these things remind me of my old days. When I used to be so writing nice emails and getting in touch with people, making phone calls and things like that, and also working with employees now, but it is way different because I feel like there's more ownership here now. So I'm more of a designer now. I create things around it, and the amount of whatever amount of time I put in this, whatever amount comes back. So it's much more liberating in that way.
Yeah. It feels different when you work long hours, but you're doing it for yourself.
Yeah, I don't think that's necessarily the point. I think there's the scope is bigger. There's way more things now. I have to deal with so many things at once. There's a production. There's a shipment. There's a customer. There's my business partner. There's this Excel sheet. It's all of these things, and it's somehow it can get annoying sometimes. So it's not always fun.
You're like, I just want to focus on this one, and then the phone starts ringing, and you have to deal with a grumpy customer.
Yeah, exactly. And then something went wrong here. What went wrong? What happened? And then you have to find out. But these are the growing pains anyway. Like with anything. I mean, even as a beekeeper, it's not all just flowers and bees, right? It's
oh gosh.
So there's quite a few annoying parts about it. So I guess that just comes with it. But yeah, to answer your question, it is still a passion of mine, and I do really enjoy sometimes when I take my time, which I don't do much, but when I take the time to look back, I really feel like, oh, this is so meant to be, or this is so wonderful. But really, like, these are short little windows of joy, of moments, and the rest of it is work in a way. But
the work in the scramble.
But definitely there's also perks that come with it, and yeah, traveling to New Zealand obviously is always a nice thing, and being in touch with like-minded people is also really nice. So it is, and also working with so many more people too. Like when you start to market, then you don't do everything yourself. There's other people that are better than you, and you work with them, and it's so interesting to create. That's definitely an aspect that I enjoy quite a lot. That's a dimension that I didn't have before. That creation.
There is a lot of Manuka honey sold these days, so or at least a lot that's labeled Manuka.
Yeah.
What should customers be aware of when they're buying product?
It's a very challenging thing, actually. How do you know you are getting the real deal, right? How do you know you're buying the right product? And I think there's a lot of innovative things of trying to show that this is the real honey. So there's some QR codes that, single hive honey, or it's pure and raw, and you can trace the honey back to the hive and those things. But then again, I think to myself, like, I haven't seen a drum or a tank that fits only 30 to 50 kilos for jarring honey, or, I couldn't see this with bigger companies, that they would be able to promise a single hive sort of honey. So this is none of it. So there's all these things, but people are trying to communicate that this honey is legit. Essentially, that's what people are trying to say. And obviously people who are packers and people who import or trade honey, they are experts in their field, right? So for me to buy honey that was not genuine is probably, it's not so easy to sell a honey to me that's not genuine. But that's because I have all these analyses, and I know what to look for, and I know the people that I buy from, and all of these things. But how does a consumer who doesn't know anything about honey know?
Exactly. How do they make a decision? I mean, we see the really cheap honey that's sold in supermarket chains, and it says, Manuka in large, and then in small writing it says blend somewhere, and the consumer doesn't know.
I was in California 5 or 6 weeks ago, and in Portland, and so we went to a big American organic outlet, right? So we went and I took a look at their shelves, and I was surprised to see the broad spectrum on an entire shelf dedicated to Manuka honey. And then I looked closer, and I saw that all of these honeys were the inferior Manuka honeys. There was not a single one of them that was actually the stronger Manuka honey. It was all the cheaper, inferior ones. And I thought to myself, well, how is a consumer going to decide between all of these inferior Manuka honeys?
By whatever label strikes their fancy. I mean,
exactly, right? But there's so many different numbers. I mean, it's so convoluted. And I was thinking to myself, like, there's no choice here. People that think that they're buying Manuka from this shelf, that they're buying the real deal, they actually have no comparison to match it up against. So, so I think this is where branding and marketing comes into play. Because if I just slap some information on a label, people who don't know anything about it, where are they going to find out unless they become experts themselves and looking up, researching on the internet and things like that. So I think, so what, for example, what we've been trying to do is we've been trying to build a credible brand, so we've tried to take that knowledge that we have and basically propel it forward and try to make that information available to their customers so they know what it is that they're buying, because there are so many different varieties of Manuka honey. There's no single one Manuka honey. They're all slightly different, and they're also different in price and different in availability and all of these things. So it is through communication that somehow we're marketing. We try to come up with little pamphlets and things like that where people can read up. And so essentially they have to become knowledgeable. Otherwise they don't know. It's really difficult. Right. If you're not an expert in your field, how do you know? So this is why I believe that brands have to, or also beekeepers, they have to tell the story. They have to really educate their clientele, their customer. Yeah, have to educate the consumers so that that will do two things. First of all, they will feel like, this person is knowledgeable. He's a trustworthy person. And secondly, they'll be returning back and saying, hey, I feel comfortable with this person. I'll only buy from him or her. And yeah, it's a very challenging thing. And I think this is what we're branding, or if you're a beekeeper, you have to just stay close to your customers. And if you're a packer, then you have to tell the story.
Right.
And yeah.
Well, and that's always the hardest part, especially nowadays, because there are, in some ways, brand fickle but very savvy consumers who do a lot of reading and whose trust is easily lost. So I think brands have to be very careful of how they treat their customers. Yeah,
and it's interesting because just because you're a big brand doesn't mean that you can just ease back. Because I mean, just to give you a little hint here, that is easily understood. When the government of New Zealand found out, that this Manuka industry is an essential, it's a protect-worthy, it's a business that needs to be watched, basically. So if there are malicious people in the game, that they could ruin the reputation of Manuka in the world. We don't want that. We want consumers to feel that if they're buying a product from New Zealand, it has to be genuine. So the government got on board and they came out with a definition, basically saying putting a definition down for what a monofloral Manuka honey is. And if it passes these standards, then it is a genuine Manuka honey, right? So it took the government, I think, 1.5 or 2 years to come up with this definition. But when it finally did come out, the price for honeydew in New Zealand dropped by half.
Yeah, because it didn't fit anymore.
Right. And if you know honeydew doesn't carry pollen. If you go by pollen analysis, then it could still show as a floral honey when in fact it's a blend, right? People will try or are trying to cut corners, but again, I think if you as a business are trying to do the right thing, then you will have a different sort of also connection with your suppliers, for example, right? Sure. So the suppliers, they know, you're a knowledgeable person. If I want to keep doing business with you, I can't sell my crap to you, right? Yeah. Exactly. I can't sell my junk onto you, because if I do that with you and you find out, then you'll not come back, right? So that's how easy it is, right? So the beekeepers dealing with knowledgeable people, they will be at their best, if they want to keep the relationship. But also packers who are trying to build a brand, they will also have to be at their best, because who wants to ruin a brand, for short gains, Yeah. So some could argue, it makes sense now, but it doesn't make sense in the long run. So anyone who's trying to establish anything doesn't really have a choice.
Right.
So you just have to do the real thing. And that makes sense from my perspective. But again, I don't know what other people are doing. We're also a smaller company, and I'm still a beekeeper, so maybe I view things differently, and I could be different with a company that doesn't have any beekeepers anymore.
Well, thank you for this fascinating delve into a variety of topics. I wanted to end with one last question that I always ask everybody, and that is, if you had to represent yourself online, what pollinator would you choose as your online avatar?
What pollinator would I choose for my online avatar?
Yeah.
Like, what do you mean
if
by?
You had to pick one. Well, I mean, some people pick Apis mellifera. Some people are huge bumblebee fans.
I'm certainly a bumblebee.
You're a bumblebee? All right.
I'm most certainly a bumblebee. Yes. I can't be missed, but I'm not very delicate.
So, well, I have to say, Germany has some of the cutest bumblebees because they're much different colored than they are in the States. And so
they look different all over. They look different all over. It's so nice. I mean, I find them far more fascinating than the honeybee for sure. The bumblebees are so.
Don't tell anybody that.
No. But they are really beautiful.
No, I agree.
Creatures, and different sizes, different colors. I really like that.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much, Kirsten. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for bringing us Matthew, Kirsten. I have to be honest with you. It took me about, 5 or 10 minutes before I realized the word he was saying was Manuka. I mean, in the States, we say Manuka, Yeah. And he had a funny pronunciation.
It's a more European where it's pronounced more of a Manuka. And so they switched the emphasis a little bit.
Different emphasis on the different syllable or what,
syllables.
However they say. Anyways, that was really good. The other thing I was wondering about is he mentioned going into the store. It sounded like a big organic store on the West Coast. And he said he saw all the lines of Manuka honey, and he said how he thought that they were all so the wrong kind or the bad kind, and not the right type of Manuka honey. So, but he didn't really say how he could tell.
Right.
Do you know? And what's the difference? I mean, there is a difference, but how can you tell? By looking at the label.
My guess is, because I've spoken with him previously, he was referring to activity level. And there are a couple of different systems for rating Manuka activity. One of them is the MGO system, which quantifies the amount of methyl glyoxal. And so those numbers tend to be quite large. And so I don't, because I'm not as familiar with the MGO scale, which is a newer scale, I believe to have an active honey, it has to be a number above 300, but I'm not exactly sure on those numbers. I can check with him and we can put it in the show notes. The other one is the UMF scale, which stands for unique Manuka factor. And that's the older scale because it was around before we knew that methyl glyoxal was the MGO that gave Manuka its activity. And so for the UMF scale, or also the Peter Molin gold standard is the same scale, just with a different name, you would want at least a 10 plus activity level to really have any of the wound healing properties. Anything below an activity of 10 is really just a table grade honey. And so it's benefiting from the rise in the love for Manuka without actually having the activity levels you would want for wound healing properties. So it's still perfectly fine as a honey if you like the flavor of Manuka honey and go ahead and enjoy it. But if you're purchasing it because you want it for its wound healing activities, those lower grade honeys don't have them. And unfortunately, what's happened a lot now is people will put Manuka very large in letters on the jar, but then it'll say, if you read the fine print, that it's a blend with other honeys. And usually those just have a slight flavor of Manuka without really being true active honeys that will do anything beyond a normal honey for healing properties.
So if someone was on a hunt for Manuka honey and they wanted to use it on a wound or a sore or something, do you want to look for specifically the rating of the Manuka on the label that says it's above
a certain
10.
level? And so with the older, the UMF system, or that's a phenol equivalent, so 10 plus is what you want for activity. And there's a lot of honey that's for sale that's only a 5. Like a lot of the honey that you'll find just on supermarket shelves will be a 5+. You really don't need anything above 15. So in the 10 to 15 is the sweet spot that you want for healing activity. You can find honeys that are 20, 25+, but you're paying a lot more money. And those honeys you could actually dilute down with another honey and still have activity level. So that 10 to 15 range is the sweet spot. Unfortunately, I'm not as up on the MGO numbers, and so I don't know how the UMF 10 to 15 translates into a number for the MGO.
Okay. And if we can, we'll get the MGO numbers in the show notes.
Oh, there was one last thing I was going to say, Jeff. I know 2 Million
Sure.
Blossoms, you always emphasize insect pollinators, and we do devote most of our pages to butterflies and bees, but we actually cover all pollinators. And so in our latest issue, we have a piece on both bats and coyotes, because coyotes are really important for seed spreading of pawpaw and persimmon in the United States.
Well, that's interesting. I hadn't considered the coyote as a pollinator. So save the coyotes, and that's going to be a little difficult in some states, I think.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of love for coyotes, although they have a huge history in the United States. The American song dog. And they're actually very important for a lot of native fauna.
Well, they are. I wonder what the Roadrunner thinks about all that. Okay, well, that about wraps it up for this podcast. Before we go, I want to encourage our listeners to rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts wherever you download and stream the show. Your vote helps other beekeepers find us quicker. Even better, write a review and let us know what you like. As always, we thank Bee Culture, the magazine for American beekeeping, for their continued support of Beekeeping Today podcast. We want to thank our regular episode sponsor, Global Patties. Check them out at www.globalpatties.com. We also want to thank Strong Microbials for becoming the latest supporter of the podcast. Check out their probiotic line at www.strongmicrobials.com. And finally, we want to thank you, the Beekeeping Today podcast listener, for joining us on this show. Feel free to send us questions and comments at questions@beekeepingtodaypodcast.com. We'd love to hear from you. Anything else, Kirsten?
Not at this time. Have a great fall. I hope it's spooky in good ways.
Yeah, spooky in good ways. That's fun. All right, bye-bye.